The day my husband walked through our front door with another woman on his arm and introduced her to his mother as the one, I was standing in the kitchen wearing oven mitts, holding a casserole dish I'd just pulled from the oven. His mother smiled at her, actually smiled, the kind of warm, full-face smile I'd spent 4 years trying to earn and never once received. I set the dish down on the counter very carefully. My hands were shaking, but not from the heat. My name is Sophie. I was 29 years old, a registered nurse working rotating shifts at a regional hospital in Mississauga, and I had been married to my husband for 4 years. To anyone looking from the outside, marrying into his family probably seemed like a step up. His father had been a real estate developer. His mother had grown up in Oakville and made sure everyone knew it. My family was from Cape Breton. My dad worked the ferries. My mom taught elementary school. The first time I met my mother-in-law, she looked at my shoes and said, "Oh, you drove? I assumed you'd take the GO train." It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. I should have understood then what the next 4 years would look like. After we got married, she suggested, and my husband agreed, that it would make financial sense for us to live with her temporarily while we saved for a house. "Toronto prices are brutal," he said. "Just for a year." That year became 4. The house savings account, which she offered to manage since she understood the market better, was technically in her name. I never had access to it. My paychecks went into our joint account, which she also had a card for because she had co-signed the account when we first opened it, and somehow that never got changed. I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. I came home and made dinner. I cleaned. I did the grocery runs on my days off. She criticized the way I loaded the dishwasher. She told me the way I folded towels was a little sad. Once, I bought a $40 face cream because my skin was a wreck from night shifts and stress, and she left it on the kitchen counter with a post-it note that said, "Frivolous. We are saving for a home." My husband's response every time was the same. "She's just particular. You know how she is. Don't take it personally." I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself things would change when we had our own space. I kept telling myself he would eventually stand up for me. Then came the afternoon I came home early from a canceled shift. She was at the kitchen table with a woman I had never seen. Pretty, mid-30s, blazer, the kind of manicure that costs more than my grocery budget. My husband was sitting across from them, and he had a look on his face I didn't recognize at first. It took me a second to place it. It was ease. He looked completely, effortlessly at ease. The way he never looked when I walked into a room. My mother-in-law saw me first. Her expression flickered with something, annoyance maybe, or embarrassment at being caught, and then she smoothed it over with her usual composure. "You're home early," she said. Shift was canceled. My husband stood up. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has accidentally walked into a private conversation. "Sophie? This is Fiona. We've been seeing each other." I remember thinking that was an oddly gentle way to say it, seeing each other. As if they had been casually attending the same gallery openings. His mother reached over and patted Fiona's hand. "She's wonderful," she said, to me, as if that were information I might find helpful. He took me out to the backyard, the deck he had built the summer before our wedding, the one I had helped stain on a brutally hot July weekend, kneeling on the boards with a brush. He told me the marriage was over. He said he had been unhappy for a long time. He said Fiona's family had connections in commercial real estate and that this was, practically speaking, a better situation for everyone. Then he told me he'd already consulted a lawyer, that because his mother was the primary name on the account where our house savings sat, there wasn't much I could claim, that he thought a clean break made sense. He offered me 3 months of free rent, meaning I could stay in the guest room for 3 months before I needed to find something else. 3 months of free rent, in the home I had been paying for 4 years. I looked at him for a long time, then I said, "Okay." He blinked. He had expected something else. Crying, maybe, or pleading. I had spent 4 years being soft in this house, and he had mistaken that for weakness, the way people always mistake patience for weakness. He didn't know the difference, and I was, in that moment, done explaining it to him. I went inside. I smiled at his mother. I smiled at Fiona. I said it was lovely to meet her. And then I went upstairs to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and called the one person I knew would understand the specific shape of this particular disaster. Her name was Wendy. We had gone to nursing school together in Halifax. She had since become a family law paralegal at a firm in downtown Toronto, working under one of the sharpest divorce lawyers in the province. I had been at her kitchen table during her own brutal separation 3 years earlier. She had never forgotten that. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The account. Tell me exactly how it's structured." I told her what I knew. She asked me to email her every document I had access to. She said she would look at it tonight. Then she said, "Sophie, does the name Fiona Hartley mean anything to you?" It didn't. "She's currently a defendant in a civil fraud case," Wendy said. Her ex-business partner filed suit 8 months ago. She allegedly drained a joint investment account, around $400,000, and funneled it through a numbered company. The case is in discovery right now. It's not public knowledge, but it's not exactly a secret either if you know where to look. I sat very still on the edge of that tub. "My husband knows her how well?" I asked. "That's what I'd like to know," Wendy said. "Because if he's made any financial transfers to her, or if she has access to anything connected to his accounts, including the one with your house savings, you need to know about it before anyone else moves that money." We were on the phone for another hour. By the end of it, I had a plan. I didn't like parts of it, but I understood why every part was necessary. I went back downstairs. Fiona was still there. They were all having tea, looking comfortable and domestic in a way that made my teeth ache. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and I said, quietly, that I thought I had reacted badly earlier, that I had been caught off guard and said things I shouldn't have. I said I needed some time, but that I didn't want to cause problems. I asked if I could stay through the week while I sorted out some logistics. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows. She had fully expected me to be out by morning. The fact that I was asking, calmly and carefully, for a few more days, it satisfied something in her. The part that needed to be needed or needed to be right. "Of course," she said, gracious, generous, like she was doing me a kindness. My husband looked relieved. Fiona looked at me with a perfectly calibrated sympathy that I recognized immediately as the expression of someone who has already won and is now simply waiting for the paperwork. I smiled at all three of them and went upstairs to make a list. The next morning, I went to work as usual. On my lunch break, I met Wendy at a cafe on King Street. She slid a folder across the table. The house savings account had nearly $87,000 in it. My paychecks had been contributing to it every month for 4 years. Under Ontario family property law, Wendy explained, those contributions were considered matrimonial assets regardless of whose name the account was in. My mother-in-law's name being on the account didn't change that, and it was possible, depending on how contributions had been structured, that it actually complicated things for their side. "He's going to say she was holding it in trust for the two of you," Wendy said. "We're going to show that he used it as a tool of financial control. There's case law on this." She also showed me something else. Fiona Hartley's numbered company had made 2 transactions in the last 6 weeks. One of them was a transfer from an account registered to my husband's personal holding company, a company I had not known existed. The second was smaller but more damning. It had gone to a joint account belonging to my husband and Fiona that had been opened 4 months ago. 4 months ago? I thought about the past 4 months. He had seemed distracted. I had assumed it was work. I had made him dinner and asked if he was okay, and he had said he was just tired. Wendy said, "I know this is a lot. Take your time." "I don't need time," I said. "What do I do next?" She told me. I went back to that house that evening, made dinner without being asked, and smiled when my mother-in-law told me that chicken was slightly dry. I agreed with her. I apologized. I said I'd do better next time. What they didn't know was that I had started keeping a journal, time-stamped. Every comment, every critique, every instruction. I kept it in a notes app on my phone, locked with a code only I knew. Wendy had explained that documentation of a controlling environment could be relevant to how the court assessed the marriage and the asset division. I was not going to waste a single day. Fiona started coming by in the evenings. She would sit in the living room with my husband and his mother while I finished the dishes. Once, she looked at me with that sympathetic smile and said, "Sophie, you don't have to keep doing all of this. Really, you're allowed to just rest." She said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite. "You're allowed to leave now." "Why aren't you leaving?" I dried my hands on the dish towel and smiled. "I like to keep busy," I said. I had, by that point, also contacted my union rep at the hospital. My collective agreement had an emergency legal assistance clause I had never used. It covered 2 hours of consultation with a family lawyer. I used both of those hours. I also applied that same week for a nursing position at a hospital in Hamilton, a step up, a coordinator role I was qualified for, but had never applied to because it felt like too much upheaval while we were saving for a house. I got an interview within the week. 3 weeks in, my husband's mother hosted a dinner party. She did this every few months. A dozen people from her social circle, her cousin who had retired from Bay Street, 2 of her closest friends from her book club, a couple from the neighborhood she had been cultivating for years. It was the kind of dinner that was as much performance as meal. The point was to be seen and to have what you wanted people to see witnessed. This time, she wanted Fiona witnessed. She had, it emerged, been telling people for some time that my husband was getting out of a difficult situation, meaning me, and that he had found someone wonderful. Fiona was being unveiled, essentially. I was included in the evening because to exclude me at this particular moment would have been awkward, and my mother-in-law had a gift for managing optics. She told me I could sit at the far end of the table and help serve. She said it like she was being generous. I said that was fine. What she didn't know was that Wendy was coming to that dinner. Wendy, who had grown up in a family of 6 in Dartmouth, who had worked her way through law school, who had very specific feelings about women being managed and sidelined. Wendy had agreed to come as my guest. I had told my mother-in-law the week before that I'd be bringing a friend from work. She hadn't objected. Why would she? I was furniture. Furniture doesn't have friends who matter. The dinner started the way those evenings always did. Wine was poured, compliments were made. My mother-in-law moved through the room like she was conducting a symphony, directing attention, steering conversation. Fiona sat beside my husband and accepted the admiration offered to her with practiced warmth. I served and smiled and refilled glasses. About halfway through the meal, my mother-in-law raised her own glass and said she wanted to share some happy news. She announced that her son and Fiona had decided to move forward together, that they were looking at properties. She glanced at me when she said this, deliberate, surgical, and that she was just so grateful things had worked out as they were meant to. One of her friends cooed. Her Bay Street cousin lifted his glass. My husband reached for Fiona's hand. I waited. I counted to 3. Then I said, "Actually, I wanted to introduce someone as well." The table went quiet. My mother-in-law looked at me with the very controlled expression of a woman who has been caught off guard and is furious about it. I gestured toward Wendy, who was sitting 3 seats down. "This is my colleague, Wendy. She specializes in family law." I paused. "She's also been helping me understand some things about the civil fraud case currently in discovery, the one involving a numbered company and some transferred investment funds." The room did something peculiar. It didn't exactly go silent. There were small sounds, a fork set down, someone clearing their throat. But the quality of the silence in the room changed. Fiona's expression changed. It was fast, the change. There and gone. But it was the specific change of someone who has just heard a sentence they were not prepared to hear in this room, in front of these people. My husband looked at Fiona. She did not look back at him. Wendy set down her wine glass and spoke pleasantly, conversationally, the way she always spoke. She mentioned that asset tracing in matrimonial cases had become quite sophisticated. She mentioned that the discovery process for civil fraud cases sometimes turned up surprising intersecting threads. She mentioned that when funds moved between a numbered company and a personal account held jointly by two people, there were certain reporting obligations that, if unmet, could become complicated. She was not threatening anyone, she was simply making conversation. Fiona stood up. She said she had to make a phone call. She went to the front hallway and did not come back. My husband went pale. His mother looked at him. He looked at the table. Her Bay Street cousin, who apparently understood exactly what Wendy had been discussing, set his glass down slowly and began studying the tablecloth. I said calmly, "I'm going to excuse myself as well. I have an early shift." I stood up, thanked my mother-in-law for dinner, and walked out of that dining room with Wendy beside me. In the front hallway, Fiona was on her phone, speaking in a low and urgent voice. When she saw me, she stopped talking. We looked at each other for a moment. She had expected, I think, that I would be easy, that I was the kind of woman who absorbs things and disappears. I smiled at her politely, picked up my coat and left. The next 3 months were not easy, but they were clarifying. My husband tried, at first, to minimize what had happened. He said I had embarrassed his family. He said I had blindsided him. He said I had made things very difficult. I listened to all of it. I did not argue. Wendy filed on my behalf the following Monday. The petition cited adultery and financial misconduct during the marriage, specifically the undisclosed joint account, the holding company, and the redirection of funds that had been presented to me as matrimonial savings. Wendy had also engaged a forensic accountant through her firm who had, within 2 weeks, produced documentation that was, in her words, very useful. My husband retained a lawyer. His lawyer was good, but the documentation we had was better. The civil fraud case against Fiona became public 3 weeks after the dinner party. Her ex-business partner's legal team had found the same account threads Wendy's forensic accountant had found. The numbered company transfers included funds that, it turned out, had come partly from the account that was supposed to contain our house savings. My mother-in-law learned this from her Bay Street cousin, who had apparently looked into things after the dinner. She called my husband. I heard that phone call through the wall of the guest room where I was still sleeping. I did not feel satisfied exactly. I felt very tired and also like something had finally stopped pretending to be other than what it was. I got the job in Hamilton, the coordinator role with a significant pay increase and a schedule that was, for the first time in years, actually mine. I gave notice at my old unit, thanked my colleagues, and began planning where I was going to live. The divorce settlement took 4 months. My lawyer was thorough. Because of the financial misconduct documentation, the court's assessment of asset division favored my claim substantially. I was awarded the majority of the savings account balance, nearly $70,000, plus additional compensation for the period in which my income had been directed into accounts I couldn't fully access. My mother-in-law's name on the account did not protect those funds. The court was clear on that. I signed the final papers on a Tuesday afternoon in the spring. It was raining outside the office tower on Bay Street, the kind of Ontario spring rain that can't decide if it wants to be snow. I stood on the sidewalk afterward with Wendy, and she said, "Coffee?" And I said yes. We sat in a place around the corner and she ordered us both something with oat milk, and I looked out the window at the rain and felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for a very long time. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Hamilton 6 weeks later. The building was clean, the windows faced east, and in the morning, the light came in and landed on the kitchen floor in a way that made me feel like the day was mine. I bought a face cream, not the $40 one, a nicer one. I did not put it in a shared space. It sat on the edge of my own bathroom sink, and no one left notes about it. My parents drove down from Cape Breton to help me move. My dad carried boxes and complained about the elevator and then cried a little when he saw my apartment, which he tried to hide and failed. My mom bought me a plant and told me that my grandmother had always said that a woman who knows her own value is the most dangerous person in any room. I started the new job. It was harder than I expected and better than I expected, both at once. Within 3 months, I had stabilized 2 protocols that had been inconsistent on my unit and put together a training document my director asked to have circulated department-wide. I was not performing resilience, I was just doing the work, the way I'd always done the work, but this time in a place where the work was actually seen. I heard things. Over the following months, the way you hear things about people who were once close to you. The civil case against Fiona concluded with a settlement that left her legally and financially diminished. My husband lost the holding company. The house his mother had been in for 20 years went on the market. The maintenance costs without the steady contributions of a daughter-in-law who cooked and cleaned and quietly paid into accounts turned out to be more than she could manage alone. She moved to a condo in Etobicoke. My husband moved into a rental in Brampton. I did not feel triumphant about any of this. I felt quiet, and the quiet felt like mine. Wendy came to Hamilton one Saturday in the fall, and we walked along the waterfront and ate terrible poutine from a truck and talked for 3 hours. She had started seeing someone, a soft-spoken archivist she'd met at a Heritage Building fundraiser. She said he made her feel like herself, which was the best thing she could think of to say about a person. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Feeling like yourself. I had spent 4 years in a house where I felt like a version of myself that had been edited down. The rough parts and the bright parts both sanded away until what remained was functional and quiet and easy to manage. I was not that version anymore. The following spring, I called my parents and told them that I had officially applied for my nurse practitioner certification. My mother cried. My dad asked me what that meant exactly in terms of salary, and when I told him, he cried too, which he also tried to hide and also failed. The morning I got my acceptance letter, I made myself breakfast in my kitchen with the east-facing windows and the light on the floor, and I sat down at my own table with my own coffee and I read it 3 times. And I thought about the woman who had stood in an oven-mitt kitchen holding a casserole dish while her husband introduced her to his future. She had been patient, she had been careful, she had not, in the end, been weak. And she had found her way to a morning that was entirely, finally, her own. I keep thinking about the oven mitts. That's the detail I come back to, of all things. Standing in that kitchen with a casserole dish in my hands, wearing oven mitts I had bought on sale at Canadian Tire, watching my husband smile at another woman the way he had never once smiled at me. There is something almost funny about it now. The absolute ordinariness of the moment that changed everything. No dramatic music, just me, and a dish going cold, and a life that had already moved on without telling me. I used to think the hardest part of those 4 years was the cruelty. My mother-in-law's comments, the post-it notes, the way I was managed and diminished so gradually I barely noticed it happening. But looking back, I think the hardest part was the patience I asked of myself. The endless internal negotiation, just a little longer, just try a little harder, just be a little quieter. I confused endurance with virtue. I thought surviving something quietly was the same as handling it well. It isn't. I know that now. What got me out wasn't anger, though there was anger. It was something quieter and more stubborn than that. A refusal, somewhere deep down, to accept that the version of myself I had become in that house was the version I was going to be. I knew who I was before I walked into that family. I had worked hard, I had studied hard, I had cared for strangers in their worst moments with steadiness and skill. None of that had disappeared. It had just been pushed into a very small space and told to stay there. Wendy once said to me, a few months after everything settled, that what I had done wasn't really about revenge. It was about information, about knowing exactly what was happening and refusing to be the only person in the room who didn't. She was right. The dinner party, bringing her to that table, that wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of clarity. I had spent 4 years being managed by people who relied on me not knowing things. The moment I started knowing things, the whole structure they had built around me stopped working. There's a version of this story where I feel sorry for my mother-in-law, and some days I do, a little. She lost her retirement savings to a woman she believed was going to elevate her family. She trusted her son's judgment completely, and his judgment was catastrophically wrong. The cruelty she aimed at me for 4 years didn't protect her from any of it. It never does, I think. The need to diminish someone else rarely comes from strength. It comes from a kind of fear that never gets examined. As for my husband, I don't think about him much anymore. Not because I'm bitter, but because he genuinely doesn't take up space in the life I'm living now. That's not something I manufactured. It just happened slowly as I filled my days with work that mattered and people who were decent and mornings that belonged entirely to me. What I would tell someone in that kitchen, standing in those oven mitts, is this: the moment you decide to stop waiting for someone else to recognize your value is the moment your life actually starts. Not the dramatic moment, not the dinner party, not the courtroom, the quiet one in the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub, calling the one person you know will take you seriously. That's where it begins. That one honest phone call to yourself.